everyone, I'm filming an update video today after my cross stitch tutorial series, how to complete a mini cross stitch kit. And all I want to do today is give you a few updates on the techniques that I've used in there. So there's a couple of things that I wouldn't do anymore, things that I've changed, and just tips that I've learned along the way. So I wanted to share them with you today. If you're a beginner, completing a tiny little cross stitch is a good idea because it's nice and small and you can just see if you like it, but actually in some ways it's harder than doing something a little bit bigger. If you do something a little bit bigger, you can buy a kit with your threads already organised, and you can use a hoop, and that makes stitching an awful lot easier because it holds the material taut for you. The threads that you get are also much longer, they're about 75 centimetres long, and that means that you're not constantly having to change your threads. So even if you're a beginner, I would really suggest that you go for something a little bit bigger than a teeny tiny kit, because actually it's easier. You can buy these hoops in all different sizes. You can buy them from just a couple of inches right up to quite big sizes, and they're inexpensive. You can get them from any haberdashery or online. And putting these onto your work means that it's easier to hold and all the material lies really flat, so that when you're stitching, if you've got any straight edges, they'll be perfect. And just the tension on your stitches is really easy to maintain. Slightly bigger kits don't have to be scary. The one that I'm working on at the moment is a sampler, and as you can see from this, there's actually lots of blank space on the Ida. Not everything is stitched, so you can sit down and do a whole section in one go, which is quite satisfying. It feels like you're making a lot of progress. I love samplers, and I always tend to choose things with a lot of blank space on. A couple of other things that I've learned along the way are about how to do a loop start from the front. And if you're using these longer threads, it's a lot easier to always start with a loop start. I don't really ever start with a waist knot unless I'm doing a tiny little kit, which I don't tend to do because they're quite frustrating. So starting with a loop start is really, really good because it's secure and it lies flat, and you haven't got to worry about making sure that it's all secured at the back. It's just done and it's ready for you. You can just start to enjoy getting into the flow of your stitching. I'll put in a clip now of how I do a loop start from the front.
So in this clip, I'm actually holding my phone whilst trying to stitch with the other hand. So forgive me that it's a little bit shaky. You can see me going down into the Ida there, leaving the loop showing. I come back up from the opposite hole, thread it through that loop, pull gently, and then I'm going to put it back down one of the holes, pull it through, and you need to give it a little bit of a tug to get the loop to go back to the other side. And that's the technique. I hope you can see that clearly.
Another thing I've learnt to do, which makes your stitches lie really beautifully, is something called railroading, which is where you place the needle between your threads before you complete your stitch, and I'll put in a video and show you how I do that now.
So the first part of the stitch I won't railroad, I'll just stitch that normally, and then on the second one through I'll come up, pass the needle through the middle of the two threads and push it down.
And finally, I actually have learnt to stitch with two hands, which makes stitching a lot easier. This is the seated hoop frame that I use. It's got just a wooden hoop on the top, and then this part goes underneath your legs when you're sitting down, so it holds it for you and allows you to stitch two-handed.
Just wanted to show you the way that I stitch. So this is my hoop tucked under my legs. Keep my right hand underneath, left hand on top, simply because I can trust my right hand to do what I want it to do without having to look at it. Probably took me about a day to teach myself to do this, but it's so much quicker than stitching one-handed whilst you hold the hoop. It's so nice that the Ida is taut and get a really good finish. I have chosen on this project to do my top stitch going from the top right hand corner to the bottom left hand corner, but I think most people prefer to do top left to bottom right. It's your decision which direction your top stitches go in, so long as they're all the same.
One thing I included in my tutorial was if you're unpicking to stitch backwards, and I really would never do that again. So if you go wrong, I would always suggest just taking it out carefully and restitching. If you do frog and you've taken out some stitches that you've gone wrong on, if it's possible, try not to use that thread again. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but if you've got enough thread in your kit, try and use a fresh piece and it will look a lot better. I've also learned not to stitch right to the last little bit of my thread. I'll always finish it off while the stitch still look good and perhaps leave, you know, a good few inches of thread left. It might seem a little bit wasteful not to try and get the very last stitch in, but it will look a lot neater and nicer. When it comes to washing my kits, I have to admit that I am a little bit wild and crazy when I come to washing my kits now, and I actually put them in the washing machine. Now this isn't a technique that I would necessarily suggest to everybody, but it works really well for me. I put them in a fabric bag, the sort of thing that you'd put underwear or delicates in, and I put it on a hand wash setting with a silk and wool liquid, and they come out brilliantly, and they actually get a much better wash than I would give them by hand. It depends how precious you are about your piece, but I took one of my pieces to the dry cleaners to see if they would clean it, and because it hadn't got a label on, they wouldn't actually clean it for me. So I had a really stubborn stain in my fairy one, which I was featured in my original video, and I just couldn't get it out by hand, so I decided to throw it in the washing machine and see if that would get it out, and it came out brilliantly. It was really good. The other thing is that when I'm ironing my cross stitches, I really do put them on quite a high setting and put the steam on, because sometimes it's really hard to get the creases out, and I have had a few pieces framed where they're still creased, and that's quite disappointing when you've spent so long on them. So don't be afraid to perhaps put the iron on a little hotter than I originally recommended as well. I said it in my first video and I'll say it again now, there really is no absolute right or wrong way to stitch. The fact is, if you're enjoying it, you're doing it right. I hope you found this update helpful, and I'll see you soon. Bye!